I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event.
The palace did not tremble because a collection changed hands. It trembled because King Charles made the decision final. In one sealed confirmation, he named Princess Anne as the sole heir to Elizabeth's forbidden royal collection, cutting through years of private expectation, family tension, and silent rivalry. What had once been hidden behind locked doors suddenly became the most dangerous inheritance in the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the silence in the room was not empty. It was waiting. The confirmation of formal written approval that made the decision official inside the royal household lay before him with the weight of a verdict. This was not a normal inheritance. Elizabeth's forbidden royal collection meant a guarded set of private jewels, personal letters, ceremonial pieces, and unseen family objects that had never been treated like ordinary possessions. They carried memory, they carried judgment, they carried the late monarch's private wishes in a way no public crown ever could. Anne received the news with the stillness of someone trained by a lifetime of duty. She did not reach for triumph. She did not ask who had objected. She simply absorbed the truth that the collection had passed to her alone, and in that quiet pause, her face tightened. The king had not handed his sister a prize. He had handed her a burden wrapped in velvet, sealed by history, and sharpened by family pain. Charles signed the page without ceremony. His pen moved once, then stopped. He placed it down carefully, as though the smallest sound might expose the damage already done. He knew Camilla would feel the exclusion. He knew William would understand the politics before he accepted the emotion. He knew Harry, even from a distance, would see the decision as another closed door. Camilla, William, and Harry had all been placed outside the direct claim, and that single fact gave the document its cold power. A senior aide stepped closer and noticed the line that changed the air: restricted handling. The phrase meant certain items could only be seen, moved, or discussed under special control, and its presence made the aide's expression harden. This was not just about jewels. Something inside that collection was dangerous, because it could reopen old wounds, confirm old fears, or reveal choices Elizabeth had hidden behind years of royal calm. Anne understood it before anyone said it aloud. Charles had chosen her because Elizabeth had trusted her silence. Yet, as the sealed notice moved through the household, one private reaction was already rising behind another closed door, and that reaction threatened to turn the king's decision into a family crisis. Princess Anne had never chased the brightest crown, the loudest room, or the easiest affection. That was why the late queen trusted her. Anne knew how to carry duty without turning it into performance, and Charles knew it too. Yet the moment he confirmed her as sole heir, the decision stopped being about loyalty alone. It became a declaration about who had earned Elizabeth's deepest confidence. Anne stood alone beside the closed cabinet, her hand resting on the polished wood as if she could still feel Elizabeth's presence through it. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. The forbidden royal collection, the late queen's private group of jewels, letters, ceremonial pieces, and personal objects, kept away from ordinary family division, had never been about beauty alone. It mattered because those items carried choices Elizabeth never explained in public. And once Anne held control, those choices could no longer be twisted by anyone else. Charles understood why his mother had trusted her. The king saw Anne not just as his sister, but as the keeper of a standard the monarchy had started to lose. Discipline without drama, loyalty without bargaining, service without needing applause. He knew she would not use the collection to win attention. He knew she would not leak its meaning to soften her image. That was why the decision cut so deeply. It proved Elizabeth had trusted character more than position. Camilla felt the blow before anyone said her name. The queen consort sat with a still face. but her silence had weight. She knew the family would understand what the decision suggested, even if no one dared speak it plainly. Anne had been trusted with the late monarch's most guarded private legacy, while Camilla had been left outside the circle. That exclusion was not loud. It was worse. It was quiet enough to feel deliberate. William struggled in a different way. The prince respected Anne, and he knew the future king could not treat every family decision as a personal insult. But he also understood the power of what had happened. If Elizabeth's hidden collection carried private letters, personal instructions, and pieces linked to decisions never shared with the public, then being placed outside its control meant being placed outside part of the monarchy's deepest memory. An aide quietly told Charles that several relatives had expected the collection to be divided. Some believed small pieces would pass through different branches. Others believed the future king would at least hold shared authority. Charles heard the words and did not answer quickly. He knew expectations were not instructions. He knew desire was not duty. And he knew Elizabeth had not left Anne with this burden by accident. Anne finally lowered her hand from the cabinet and whispered, "She never gave anything without a reason." The words were soft, but they struck harder than anger. Charles looked toward her, and even he seemed to understand that the real story had not begun with the signed confirmation. It had begun earlier. In a private moment no one wanted dragged back into the light. And behind Anne's quiet acceptance lay the hidden moment that made Elizabeth's forbidden collection impossible to divide. Every royal crisis has a moment everyone pretends was smaller than it really was. For this one, it happened at Balmoral during a private remembrance gathering after Elizabeth's passing. A locked display case was opened for only a few family members, and one conversation changed everything. From that night forward, Charles understood the collection could never be shared without tearing open wounds Elizabeth had carefully sealed. Charles remembered the room going quiet before anyone understood why. The Balmoral Remembrance Cabinet incident, a private moment when selected royals viewed a locked cabinet of Elizabeth's personal items after a family gathering, had seemed controlled at first. It mattered because that cabinet was not only storage, it held a brooch, handwritten notes, and ceremonial pieces tied to private promises the Queen had made near the end of her reign. Those objects carried unfinished meaning, and unfinished meaning inside a royal family can become more dangerous than open anger. Camilla noticed the separation before anyone explained it. The Queen Consort looked toward the items kept apart from the others and asked, carefully, why certain pieces were being held away from her household. Her voice was calm, but the question struck the air like a match. Anne understood the danger at once. She knew that once the collection became a matter of household rights, personal hurt would turn into public symbolism, and Elizabeth's private wishes would be pulled into a battle they were never meant to survive. Anne did not raise her voice. She simply said those pieces had been kept together for a reason. Charles watched his sister defend their mother's wishes, with a calm that made the room feel smaller. Camilla withdrew, and even without tears, her hurt was clear. The king saw it. He felt it. But he also saw something else. Anne was not protecting herself. She was protecting Elizabeth from being divided after death by the very family she had spent a lifetime holding together. William saw the private note inside the cabinet and said nothing. The prince understood its meaning instantly. The note referred to Anne's judgment as the standard for future handling, a plain signal that Elizabeth trusted her daughter's discipline above rank, noise, or demand. For William, that was a difficult truth. He was the future king, yet the late monarch had looked beyond the line of succession and chosen the one person least likely to turn memory into power. Charles never forgot what happened next. Anne closed the cabinet herself, turned the key, and handed it back to him without a smile. No speech, no victory, just a gesture that carried the force of a final instruction. Camilla looked away, William stayed silent, and the king felt the future tightening around him. That small act became the memory Charles returned to when the family finally confronted him. The past had chosen its keeper, but the living were not ready to surrender their claims without a fight. The palace confrontation did not happen in a crowded room. It happened behind a closed door, where rank offered no protection, and silence became sharper than accusation. Camilla faced Charles with the pain of someone who believed she had been pushed outside the final circle. Charles did not shout. He did something worse. He listened, then refused to change a single word. Camilla kept her voice low, but her words carried years of pressure. She asked why Anne had been named the only heir when Elizabeth's collection belonged to a reign that now touched the whole monarchy. The queen consort was not asking about diamonds alone. She was asking about recognition, trust, and the quiet message sent when one woman was chosen and another was left outside. The phrase, sole heir, meant the one person given full inheritance rights, and in this case, it gave Anne complete control over a guarded part of the late monarch's private legacy. Charles heard the pain beneath the question. The king explained that the decision followed Elizabeth's private instructions and his own judgment about who could protect the collection without exploiting it. That mattered, because the forbidden royal collection carried more than family memories. It carried private letters, personal pieces, and choices from the late queen's final years that could hurt living people if handled with anger, pride, or revenge. Charles looked torn, but he did not move away from the decision. Camilla felt the answer like humiliation. She knew Anne had been handed a level of trust she herself had not received, and the silence around that truth made it even sharper. The queen consort asked the question Charles had feared most, whether the collection contained letters about her. His face changed, not with guilt, not with anger. With the stillness of a man who knew one wrong sentence could break open years of buried pain, Charles did not reveal the contents. Instead, the monarch said only that some pieces must never become weapons. That single line confirmed enough. The collection held explosive emotional material, things that could be used to wound, defend, expose, or rewrite memory. Camilla understood it at once. So did the king. The issue was no longer who received an inheritance. It was who had the power to decide what stayed hidden. Camilla pushed back her chair and stood with controlled anger. She told Charles that Anne had been given more than objects. She had been given power. The words landed hard because they were true. Charles knew it, but he also knew the power was not built on affection. It was built on restraint, discipline, and the late queen's final trust. And once power entered the room, the palace had to ask, who truly controlled Elizabeth's final legacy? The forbidden collection was never dangerous because of gold, diamonds, or royal beauty. It was dangerous because it carried judgment. Every object pointed to a decision, every letter carried a memory, and every sealed instruction revealed whom Elizabeth trusted when appearances no longer mattered. Charles did not hand Anne treasure. He handed her the authority to decide what history could safely touch. William read the access clause twice before he spoke. The access clause, the part of the royal document that explained who could see, move, display, or approve items, gave Anne final control over the entire collection. That mattered because no household office, no private secretary, no senior royal, and no future plan could touch Elizabeth's hidden legacy without her approval. The prince understood the message clearly. He was the future king, but he was not the chosen keeper. Charles watched him carefully. The king had confirmed that no palace department could remove, lend, divide, or display the collection unless Anne allowed it. Private royal handling rules meant special family rules for sensitive objects, used when items were too personal or too powerful for normal inheritance. Charles knew why that protection was needed. The collection held letters, ceremonial pieces, and private objects linked to choices Elizabeth had never explained to the public. If the wrong person used them carelessly, memory could become a weapon. Anne felt the weight of every word. She had won nothing simple. She worried the family would not see her as the protector of Elizabeth's wishes, but as the woman chosen to lock others out. That thought hurt more than she expected. Anne had spent her life serving without asking for praise, yet now her silence could look like control, and her duty could look like punishment. William lowered the paper and looked toward her. The prince had every reason to feel wounded. His future role demanded strength, and this decision forced him to separate ego from duty in front of the very person trusted above him. Still, he did not challenge her. He told Anne he would not fight their grandmother's choice. The words were steady, but not easy. They cost him something. Charles then saw the sealed inventory, and even he paused. One category read, "Personal Crown Matters," a phrase used for private items connected to royal authority, family decisions, and the emotional weight of the crown. Several objects under that label were unnamed. One restricted folder carried a sharper mark, "For Anne only." The king had confirmed the order, but even he had stepped back from full control. Anne looked at that folder and understood the truth. Elizabeth had not simply trusted her with possessions. She had trusted her with restraint. William's acceptance calmed the room, and Charles seemed relieved for one brief moment. But outside that fragile peace, the first consequences were already beginning. The decision had been signed, the power had been named, and now the palace began to feel the cost. The first shockwave did not come from the public. It came from inside the family, where every quiet hallway seemed to carry the same question: why Anne? And why only Anne? People who had spent years standing near the crown suddenly felt far from it. Charles had made a decision for history, but history was not the one sitting alone in private rooms. Palace staff began changing the access lists before the family had even finished absorbing the news. Access lists meant the official names of people allowed to request, view, move, or use protected royal items. That mattered because old assumptions were being erased in real time. Names once treated as automatic were now checked, questioned, or removed. Anne's name appeared as the single approving authority, and that simple line made the decision impossible to soften. Camilla sat alone after the confrontation. Holding back tears she refused to let anyone witness. The Queen Consort had heard Charles explain the logic, the duty, and the late Queen's wishes, but none of it removed the sting. Anne had been placed at the center of Elizabeth's hidden legacy. Camilla had been left outside it. That mattered, because royal exclusion is never just private pain. Inside a palace, exclusion becomes meaning. It becomes rank. It becomes a message people read even when no one says a word. Charles felt the loneliness of kingship settle heavily around him. The king had protected Elizabeth's instructions, but the cost was now spreading through his own household. He knew Camilla was wounded. He knew Anne would be blamed by some for simply obeying what had been left to her. He knew William had accepted the decision with discipline, yet even discipline could not erase the wound of being placed outside a powerful part of family history. Then the first request arrived. It was connected to a future royal display, a planned showing of selected items meant to honor Elizabeth's reign. A royal display meant a public or private presentation of important pieces, usually arranged to support memory, duty, and national pride. But this time, the request stopped cold. Anne had not approved it. An aide discovered that one ceremonial piece expected for a palace event had now fallen under restricted control. Restricted control meant it could not be moved or used without special permission. The aide read the note twice, then carried the folder to Anne, knowing the room would change the moment she opened it. Anne read the request in silence. She looked at the page, closed the folder, and said, "Not yet." No anger, no explanation, just calm finality. Charles heard about the refusal and understood what it meant. Anne would not bend quickly to pressure, not from staff, not from family, not from tradition dressed up as urgency. Her refusal forced the family toward the one conversation paperwork could not solve. The palace could process forms, adjust lists, and freeze ceremonies, But only two people could decide whether this inheritance would destroy the family or steady it. There were no aides in the room when Anne finally asked Charles the question everyone else was afraid to say aloud. Not about jewels, not about rank, not about Camilla, William, or the future. She asked whether he had chosen her because Elizabeth wanted it, or because he needed someone strong enough to carry what he could not bear to hold alone. Charles did not answer at once. The king looked like a man caught between love and command, between being a son and being the monarch. A monarch means the reigning king or queen, the person who carries the crown's highest duty. That mattered, because Charles was no longer only protecting his mother's memory as her child. He was protecting it as the man responsible for the future of the royal family. And every wrong move could turn grief into scandal. Anne waited without pressing him. She had no patience for soft excuses, and Charles knew it. This private meeting mattered because it removed every shield around the decision. No staff, no palace procedure, no careful wording. Just brother and sister facing the truth behind the sealed confirmation. Anne refused to let the inheritance hide behind documents, because documents could explain authority, but they could not explain pain. Charles finally admitted what he had been carrying for years. He had tried to be son, king, husband, and guardian all at once, and each role had pulled him in a different direction. As a son, he wanted to protect Elizabeth's final wishes. As a husband, he knew Camilla had been hurt. As king, he knew William had to understand restraint. As guardian, he knew the collection could damage the family if handled carelessly. Anne softened, but not in a sentimental way. She reminded Charles that Elizabeth had trusted action more than speeches. The late queen had watched people closely, judged them quietly, and chosen carefully. Anne understood that trust was not a decoration, it was a demand. If she had been named sole heir, then she had been asked to guard the collection from revenge, vanity, and public hunger. Charles opened a small box and showed Anne the handwritten instruction inside. A handwritten instruction meant a private note left in Elizabeth's own words, carrying personal force even when it was not spoken publicly. Anne read it once, and her expression changed. Charles closed the box before either of them could break down. That single movement said what neither wanted to admit. The collection held pieces that could wound people still living. Anne promised him she would not use the collection to punish anyone. She would not let others use it to rewrite Elizabeth's memory. She would protect it, even if the family misunderstood her for doing so. Charles heard the promise, and, for the first time since signing the confirmation, seemed less alone. With Anne's promise secured, the story could no longer stay behind palace walls. What began as a private inheritance now became a national symbol, and the world was ready to judge it. By morning, the palace could no longer contain the meaning of Charles's decision. The world did not see an administrative change. It saw a royal verdict. Anne had been chosen as the keeper of Elizabeth's most guarded legacy, and every headline turned the same private wound into public theater. For the monarchy, the silence around the collection became louder than any official statement. Charles understood the danger the moment the story left palace walls. Palace Communications, the official team that shapes public messages from the royal household, tried to present the decision as orderly continuity, meaning a calm transfer of responsibility from one royal generation to the next. But the public heard something sharper. Anne had been chosen over every other senior figure, and that mattered because Elizabeth's private trust now looked like a judgment on the living family. Camilla saw the coverage and felt the exclusion deepen. The queen consort had already felt the private wound, but now the world could read it too. She did not need anyone to explain the meaning. Anne's name was everywhere. Anne's loyalty was being praised. Anne's restraint was being treated as the reason Elizabeth's locked legacy had survived. For Camilla, every calm headline felt like another door closing in public. William stayed composed, but the prince understood the bigger danger. If the collection had been divided, It could have created years of quiet rivalry, family pressure, and public guessing. He knew Anne's role protected the future monarchy from an inheritance fight that could poison everything Charles was trying to steady. Still, William also knew the decision had changed the balance inside the family. Anne had become more than trusted. She had become necessary. Then one front page said what everyone else was thinking. The headline read, "Anne gets Elizabeth's locked legacy." Those words landed with brutal simplicity. A locked legacy meant a private inheritance kept under strict control. Not because it was beautiful, but because it carried history too sensitive to be freely shared. Charles saw the headline and knew the palace explanation would never fully compete with that image of Anne holding the key. A broadcaster outside Buckingham Palace framed the story as the late Queen's final act of trust. That line changed the mood. It did not make Anne look greedy. It made her look chosen. The broadcaster repeated that Charles had confirmed what Elizabeth had quietly prepared, and suddenly the decision felt less like palace politics and more like a final message from the late monarch. A crowd gathered near the palace gates, some holding flowers, some speaking in low voices, as if Elizabeth's memory had returned to the center of national feeling. One woman said Anne was the only one who would never turn the Queen's memory into display. The words spread because they were simple, painful, and believable. Charles heard the public judgment. Camilla felt it. William accepted it. Anne carried it. The palace had been stunned, the public had spoken, and now only the final verdict remained. In the end, the decision was not about who lost access. It was about who could be trusted with silence. King Charles confirmed Anne as sole heir to Elizabeth's forbidden royal collection, because some legacies are too fragile to be divided, too powerful to be displayed, and too sacred to be used as comfort prizes. The palace was stunned, because the truth was simple. Elizabeth had chosen character over position. Anne understood the final meaning before anyone dared say it clearly. Her inheritance was not royal favoritism. It was Elizabeth's trust, placed into the hands of the one person least likely to turn memory into performance. The archive box, a protected storage case used for important royal papers and private objects, mattered because it held more than instructions. It held the late Queen's final judgment about duty, restraint, and the danger of letting personal pain decide public legacy. Charles accepted the cost with a heavy heart. The king knew his role was not to please everyone. It was to protect what his mother believed should survive untouched. That mattered, because the collection could have become a family battlefield, with every object turned into proof, every letter turned into accusation, and every silence turned into suspicion. By confirming Anne, he ended the fight before it could consume the people already wounded by it. Camilla remained hurt, but the Queen Consort understood the new reality. Challenging Anne would not heal the wound. It would only make the exclusion louder, sharper, and more public. She knew the world had already read the message, and any resistance now would look like hunger for what Elizabeth had chosen to seal. Camilla's pain did not disappear, but it changed. It became something she had to carry quietly. William accepted the decision as a lesson he could not ignore. The prince saw that future kingship was not about holding everything. It was about protecting what should not belong to personal pride. Anne's authority showed him that real power can be strongest when it refuses to take, refuses to display, and refuses to turn private legacy into public victory. William understood that restraint had become the final command. Anne chose not to display the collection immediately. That decision proved everything. She would not use Elizabeth's trust to raise her own status. She would not rush the objects into public view to prove her importance. The restricted items would remain sealed, but now their silence had meaning instead of mystery. They were no longer hidden because the palace was afraid. They were protected because Elizabeth's memory deserved peace. Anne placed the handwritten instruction inside the archive box and turned the key. She told Charles that nothing would be touched until it could be handled with honor. The king heard those words and knew the inheritance battle was over. His sister had accepted the burden, not the glory. She had become the guardian, not the owner. Charles's confirmation gave Elizabeth's memory the protection it demanded. Anne's appointment restored one principle above all others. The crown is not protected by possession, but by restraint. There is no unfinished question left in this moment, only the quiet weight of Elizabeth's final trust, now resting in Anne's hands. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.